Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Manara Podcast. This is a part two of our last episode. Uh, in our last episode, we spoke about essentially the presence of Islam and Muslims in Russia. We spoke a lot about Dagestan, Chechnya, that region, the dialects, the culture there. And basically, it was just to continue on from that. We spoke a lot about the Russian Empire, lots of figures such as Imam Shamil, the impact he had on the Ummah, and of course the challenges and persecution that the Muslims felt in that region, and how now that's led on to the rise of communism and World War One. So we're going to take it off from there. I'm joined again by Hasan and Zan. And yeah, we'll just jump right in, really, from where we left off. It's such a huge topic; we had to make a second part. So it's nice to have both of you again to continue that, inshallah. So yeah, Hasan.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum guys. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah,
we left off kind of talking about the Russian Empire and the effect that it had on the Muslims in the region, how it kind of developed over the centuries. And essentially, we touched on this, but inshallah, we'll go over again. Obviously, we know that once World War One started, 1917, so near the end of the war, World War One went from 1914 to 1918. But in 1917, the Russian Empire, who were on the side of the Allies, they had to pull out of the war because of a revolution back in the fatherland, as they call it. We know that the Bolsheviks, the communists, led by Vladimir Lenin, they staged an uprising, overthrew the monarchy, the Romanovs, executed them and took power and took control over the lands of the Russian Empire. And obviously, as previously mentioned, the Russian Empire came to have control over large portions of lands occupied by the Muslims. They introduced a lot of different policies on how to control these populations, how to control these lands. We talked about obviously policies involving paying off the scholarly class, controlling the scholarly class, kind of trying to replace the Sharia with Russian law, with Russian culture, etc. And obviously, once communism came in, the policies and let's say the philosophy of the ruling party, the communists, was completely different. And we know that one of the main tenets, called the tenets of communism, is a anti-religion, a prohibition of religion. The only law that should be obeyed is the law of, essentially, they'll call it the people, but essentially the ruler, the dictator. In this case, Vladimir Lenin went on to be Joseph Stalin. And because of this, obviously, they want essentially call it like an iron grip over the people. And in order to achieve this, they had to ban religion. So anyone with, first of all, the scholars executed or exiled, usually executed. Religious literature destroyed and banned. Masajid, even churches or whatever it may be, destroyed, banned. So a lot of people, in order to continue to practice their religion, they would have to go underground, right? Teach in private. Not even teach. They'd be happy enough just to practice themselves. They want to pray, they pray in a basement, in a dark room, close the blinds. If they have Qur'ans, they would hide them, change the covers, wherever it may be. Because as we know, one of the systems that the communists had in place was they would have informants everywhere. So it's not just the government or the police that would keep an eye on you. It would also be the ordinary citizen. Could be your neighbor, could be the guy down the road, could be your relative. So even you'd hide these things from even those people, right? So obviously it forced a lot of people on the ground. As a result, obviously, maybe the people who were there during their transition, they would obviously know about the religion. They've learned about it before. They were praying before. But once the new generations come up, they're not aware of these things. They might know, okay, by identity we're a Muslim, but they don't know the rulings. They don't know the basic pillars of Islam. They're not practicing them. They just might know, okay, I'm Tatar and we're Muslims, or I'm Chechen and we're Muslims, but they won't pray, They won't. They'll do the the haram things. That's to say, I'm not going to go into detail, but
Yeah.
they would essentially. It's just from a lack of knowledge, from ignorance.
Mm.
Parents would be a lot of them would be afraid to teach it to their children.
Yeah.
A lot of people obviously brainwashed into believing, okay, this is wrong by
Similar
a
to
religion.
the
Yeah,
Uyghur Muslims and what they go through, really.
exactly. Yeah, we can actually see that for real today with the Uyghurs in China. And yeah, this obviously goes on um, throughout the duration of the Soviet Union. In the earlier stages, it was a lot stronger with people like Joseph Stalin in control, and it really peaked for the Caucasus and the Muslims around the Caucasus around World War II. So we know that during 1940 Operation Barbarossa, the Nazis invade Russia. And one of the things that they do straight away is instead of going towards, kind of occupying the center, obviously they have a general offensive towards Moscow and taking the capital. But one of their first initiatives is actually to go straight down south into the Caucasus because of a couple of reasons. One, resources. So obviously the Caucasus is rich in oil. One of the first oil fields and oil refineries in the world was in Baku, which is in the Caucasus. And Russians, they were getting a lot of oil from there. So obviously they want to put that out, they want to take it for themselves. Another one is location, strategic location. One of the reasons why the Russian Empire was so interested in that region initially. Same reasons the Nazis want to come in, they want to take over that region, they want to occupy it. And the Soviets, the Soviet Union, the communists, they used this time as a reason to force deport the Muslims, particularly the Vainakh people, the Chechen and Ingush people, in 1944. There's a specific day, February 23rd, what is the day that the Russians forcibly deported the the Vainakh people. Alongside the Vainakhs, there was also some other groups, the Karachais, the Tatars in Crimea, but the entire population of the Vainakhs was forcibly deported or killed. And the reasons that the Soviet Union gave, the official reason, was that they claimed that the Vainakhs collaborated with the Nazis against the Russians.
Mm.
Okay, and they used this as an excuse to deport the Muslims. What they did essentially was they rounded the Muslims up in cattle trains. Okay, whoever was not able to get onto the cattle trains was executed on the spot. So essentially what happened, they bring a lot of army, a lot of soldiers, around 100,000. They call everyone to the main square, claim it's some sort of announcement. People show up, they tell them, all right, you have 15 minutes to pack your stuff and get on the train. People that resisted, people that were unable, all elderly, sick people, executed on the spot. And these people were then deported to foreign lands, essentially. Siberia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, right? They cleansed the lands. One of the reasons, or one of the theories, which I think is quite plausible, is that the Soviet Union wanted to create a corridor towards Turkey. And the reason they want to cleanse the Muslims is because the Turkish nations, the Turkish nation, the Middle East is considered Muslim lands, and they don't want any resistance along the way. So from the north of the Caucasus, where the Crimean Tatars are, going down along that road, I mentioned the old military road which goes through the Caucasus, goes into Georgia. Along them, you have the Karachais, you have the Vainakh people who are Muslims. They don't want any resistance. Once they go in, they don't want to get hit from behind, so they want to clean this route out, essentially. Clean the route, get to the Middle East, and invade Turkey from there. Because obviously we know that the conflict between the Russians and the Turkish, the Ottomans, existed for centuries. That conflict has always been there. They're one of one of the interested parties in the Caucasus. In the southern Caucasus, we have Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. We know that Turkey influenced those regions. Turkey had a lot of, let's say, activity in those regions. And so this was a high priority interest for the Russians, for the Russian Empire, and subsequently the communists. And so this is one of the theories I think is a lot more plausible than the collaboration with Nazis, because that certainly didn't happen. If there was, it's a small amount of people. And even then, a lot of the, because of obviously communism, you have a lot of people signing up for the military, drafts, conscriptions. And you had a lot of Wehrmacht people in the Russian military, in the Red Army, fighting in defending against the German invasion. So you had a lot of people, and even these people who were fighting alongside the Russians, who were in the Russian military in different positions, if they were Wehrmacht, they were also deported. So it was essentially a mass manhunt for any sort of Wehrmacht people in any of the major Russian cities, any of the positions. Even they were forcibly removed to
So
Kazakhstan.
it was
So
just the Bannocks. It wasn't, was it the Muslim populations of Dagestan, the Avars, and those
no,
fellas? Just the
no, it
Bannocks.
wasn't. It was specifically the
Yeah.
Wehrmacht people, specifically the Wehrmacht people in 1944. And once they were deported, similar to what happened in Ireland, we know that in the northern counties, the British came in, removed the native people, and what did they do instead? They planted their own people, the Scots, the
Mm-hmm.
Brits,
Yeah.
plantation essentially, right? Forced plantation.
Right.
That's what the Russians did.
Yeah.
So once they removed the natives, they brought in Cossacks. So they're like Slavic people. They brought in Georgians, Ossetians, Dagestanis even, right? And
Yeah.
they
Well.
settled them in the homes of the Vainakh people. And what's interesting is that obviously once Stalin passes, Khrushchev comes in. Yeah, Khrushchev is the next leader after Stalin. He comes in and he goes on about he really, one of his main things was he called it de-Stalinization of the Soviet
Yeah.
Union, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any sort of policies that Stalin would have enforced, he reversed them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And one of them was the forced deportation and exile of the Wehrmacht people. So in 1957, this the reversal of this policy comes into play. People start returning, right? And the Soviets were actually quite surprised by the amount of Wehrmacht people that wanted to return or that did return. They weren't expecting such a quantity,
Okay.
right?
Well.
Because yes, you can return, yeah, but typically when something like this happens, not enough
Yeah.
people come back, and the people that have been settled there, they kind of still remain the majority, and that region remains under the influence of such people. If not completely, there's a big divide. Look at Northern Ireland, right? You have the
Mm-hmm.
Unionists, the Loyalists, wherever it may be, and there's always a conflict. We know the troubles in the 90s. That's what typically happens. Not in the Vainakh lands in Ingushetia and Chechnya. Um, Several reasons why people wanted to return. Obviously, first of all, you want to return home. It wasn't that long for people that people forgot where they are from. It was only 13 years at that point, right? So
Yeah.
people still remember it. There was a lot of discrimination against the Vainakh people in these new lands. It wasn't that they were just deported and, khalas, go do your own thing. They were also not allowed to take up certain positions, right? Administrative positions, positions of power, mayors, whatever it may be. They weren't allowed to take up these positions, right? So they were essentially kept as second-class citizens, even in these other lands. So that obviously contributed to that wanting, that need to return home. And they did return home, alhamdulillah. And obviously, as I mentioned, these other people that were settled in these lands,
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of see the reaction to some of these people, how they reacted to this, what they did, and the consequential relationship that exists because of that. And
Up
what
until
I
now.
mean by that is, yeah, up until now, exactly. What I mean by that is, for example, when we came back in 57, the Dagestanis, for example, they acknowledged that these were our lands, that these were our homes, and they returned back to Dagestan, left their homes in perfect condition, left them even some supplies, some food, some cattle to get them going again, and returned home. Right? The Georgians, same thing. They recognized they knew that these were our homes, our lands. Same thing. Left, went back to Georgia. Because of that, the relationship and the respect between the Ingush and the Georgian people, the Ingush and the Dagestani people, the relationship is fantastic, and there's a lot of respect there
Mhm.
because of that.
Yeah,
People remember that to this day. They remember that. Oh, why do you like
that's,
Georgians so much? Oh, because back in 1957 when we had our issues, they helped us out,
mhm,
and we respect them for that. Right? That's how I approach any sort of Georgian, for example. Even me, I recognize that the favor that they didn't have to react in such a way. Sure, it's the right thing to do, but they didn't have to. Nobody forced them to. Because of that, we respect them. On the other hand, the likes of the Russians or the Ossetians,
mhm, mhm.
right? They did the complete opposite. First of all, they didn't want to leave. They wouldn't leave. And even if they did leave, or they were kind of pressured to leave, they would destroy everything, leave the place a mess, to kill the cattle, burn whatever it may be, and then go back off into their lands.
That's interesting because
Um,
the same thing happened during the Azerbaijan Armenia war when the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh left Azerbaijani lands. They burned everything, put pigs in mosques. Just
yeah,
yeah, it was a very bitter departure.
exactly, and that relationship is obviously not a very nice one, not a loving relationship, not a friendly relationship. Same thing exists, I would say, between the Ingush, the Vainaks, and the Ossetians, for example. There's obviously a lot of other stuff, a lot of other issues there. 1990,
Yeah,
a lot of other stuff. I'm not
and
gonna
so up
touch on those.
until
I'm not
now,
gonna.
a lot of these formerly Muslim lands are still occupied by Russians and Ossetians.
Ossetians, no. So over time, obviously, a lot of us came back. We kind of outgrew them. So as
Nice.
an example, I can give you as an example, right? My father is born in the 70s, right? When he was in
Hmm.
school, in primary school, a lot of his class were still Russians. So the majority of
Hmm.
his classmates were Russian.
Where's this? Sorry, in
This is back home in Ingushetia.
in English, yeah.
In
Okay.
Ingushetia and in Chechnya. Ingushetia and
Yeah.
Chechnya. Around the 70s, the 80s, the majority of your classmates would have still been Russians. You go now, you won't find any. You'll find Russians in government positions, in military outposts, in bases and stuff like that. Rarely you'll find a Russians there. If you go to your class, you're going to be full of English and Russian people. First of all, as I mentioned, a lot of them just left, pressured out. They don't like us. They don't want to be around us. They're scared of us. They'll go back home and let them go back home. We don't really want them. But another reason is the birth rates. Obviously, Muslim birth rates tend to be a lot higher than non-Muslim because of obviously our family kind of, yeah, or our, what's the word?
Our sort of social, sort of civilizational perspective as a
Yeah,
religion in
Yeah.
yeah,
complete
exactly,
contradiction to the
exactly,
sort of
exactly. Yeah,
the, the legacy of communism, or obviously that in the 70s was still part of communism, but obviously,
yeah,
you know, material rational ideology isn't conducive to family and children. You know,
exactly, exactly. Yeah. So we just kind of outgrew them essentially, and if you go there nowadays, like I said, you're not going to really find many of them. Obviously, the Ossetians, they were given lands by the Soviets. So right now, Ossetia is actually, there's two parts. There's North Ossetia, there's South Ossetia. Ossetia they actually took Georgian lands, and there's a
yeah,
conflict there right
exactly.
now.
2008,
And
yeah.
2008, really 2008, yeah. And North Ossetia was as the Russians gave the lands to the Ingush lands to the Ossetians.
Okay, so the North Ossetia, which is still technically in the Russian Federation, are actually former English Muslim lands.
Exactly. So their capital is called Vladikavkaz, But these are English lands. They will claim they will change history. We were these guys. We were this guys. They would standard stuff. We've seen this a million times, right? Rewrite history, etc., etc. But they've only been around recently, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not. First of all, they're like the only non-Muslim population in the North Caucasus.
Mm-hmm.
You won't find any. Typically, how would you how would you deduce, or how would you know that you're originally from a land, or you've been there for a long time? One of the first things that you would look for is cemeteries, right?
Yeah.
If I'm able to find, for example, an English man has been buried here 800 years ago, I know that we've been here for a long time,
Yeah.
right? They can't find that. They can't find an Ossetian man that's been buried there for more than 150 years or 200 years, right? So they're new to the lands, and they'll claim that, oh yeah, we were the Alans, we've been here for 1,000 years. All of these,
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous claims, and they'll try to claim this, or they've already claimed, backed by the Russians, these Muslim lands as well. So there's ongoing conflict there constantly.
You see a lot of colonists try to do that. They try to self-indigenize. What Israelis do
Mhm.
today in Palestine, they rename places after
Yeah,
places in the Bible. Actually, most of the time, there's no archaeological evidence for any of their naming strategies. Like they have towns like named after biblical towns, but it's just random. It's just this sad attempt to you know change the toponymy of the topography of the land to create this narrative that they belong. They even
yeah,
plant European trees. They make all these little efforts to make themselves belong. But like you're saying, like there's like you're not going to find any 500 or 1,000-year old buildings, cemeteries, evidences of existence of Israelis
yeah.
or Ossetians. If you go back 500 years, you'll
Yeah.
find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even their language. One of the interesting things, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last episode, the language itself, the English, the Weihnacht language itself. Yeah, typically you'd find these languages, right? German, Spanish, or whatever it may be. They have roots, right? Okay, they
Yeah.
come from Latin. These come
Yeah.
from some sort of Arabic roots or
Yeah.
Hebrew or wherever it may be, right? The languages of the Caucasus are unique. The language of the English and Chechen's Vaynach language is unique because there are no roots. It's not related to any of these other languages,
It's an
right? It's
isolate.
really
Yeah.
unique in that way. It's an isolate,
Yeah.
exactly. That demonstrates, that proves to us that you've been there for a long time. If you came from the Middle East, you came from the north of Europe, or from Russia, or from Moscow, wherever it may be, your language will have roots there. You will be able to make a connection, right? We don't have that. We're an isolate, right?
Yeah.
Ossetian language is a Proto-Iranian language.
Yeah.
It has its
They're like
roots in
Persian people,
Iran.
aren't they? Yeah, Iranian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's just another proof, that they are not native to that land.
Mm-hmm.
If they were, they would be situated, more towards the sea, on the coast, maybe towards Dagestan, where, there's a lot of different interactions. I don't think that, because if you look at the geography, right, you have Dagestan, right? Then you have Chechnya, Ingushetia, North Ossetia, right? I don't think that the language or the ideas or the religions is going to go spread and then just go around the English Chechen people or the Dagestani people right into the mountains in Ossetia. That's not really going to happen, right?
Yeah, that wasn't a natural act. That was an act of social engineering.
Exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Um, and so obviously there's a lot of conflict because of that. And these conflicts don't occur naturally either, right? They're planted there by the Russian Empire or the communists. They want to cause a stability in the region. They know that if, for
Mm.
example, the Caucasians, the people of the Caucasus unite, the Circassians, the Chechens, the Dagestanis, the English people, it's going to be a lot of problems for them, right? They don't want that. How do they do that? They disunite the people. They cause instability in the region. And that's exactly what you're going to do by, for example, putting up the borders, giving, for example, let's just say Dagestani some Chechen land, or giving the Chechens some Dagestani land. They do this in the Middle East as well. We've again, we've seen these things before, and that's exactly what they do there in the Caucasus. We know that this causes a lot of conflict, doesn't unite the people, less problems for them, control for them, and whatever they want there.
Mm.
That's really interesting, and the USSR and a lot of communists had, and up until now, if there's whatever communists left, China, whatever, have this sort of mentality of like, oh, we're different to the West and to Europe. We're not colonists like them. But at the end of the day, you see by their tactics and their methods, they are the tactics and methods of European colonists. And at the end of the day, the genealogy of communism was the Enlightenment. It came about as a result of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, put forward ideas of universalism, creating a utopian universal society based on rational principles, and that's what liberalism does, and that's what communism does. We're going to remake society according to our rational material principles. And because we're morally justified because we're trying to create a utopia, we can justify that with all sorts of barbarity and ethnic cleansing. It's a part and parcel of the Enlightenment toolkit.
Mm.
The British and the French did it in their empires, and their Enlightenment-oriented liberal empires. America did it, when we were growing up, watching them do the war on terror in the name of like freedom and some vague liberal crap. And it's the same thing that the communists did. And so, it's really interesting, hearing you describe the experience of the Muslims, not being able to practice their religion, being ethnically cleansed, that their culture and languages being changed and banned often. That was often the case under the USSR. And it's just very similar to what the French did to Algeria, for example. They changed the language, banned certain religious practices, um, and ethnically cleansed and killed people left, right, and center. So
Yeah.
again, it's something that people don't necessarily appreciate. It's okay. The USSR did these horrible things, but this was them attempting to be, to be truly European in the Enlightenment sense. And up until now, the same way, oftentimes, a lot of colonized countries are dealing with certain cultural and institutional baggage. It's the same thing, I guess, with Muslims in former USSR lands. That's yeah.
Yeah, and we see obviously the effects of that today, or the aftermath of that today. Obviously, Soviet Union collapses, but the effect that it had on Islam is still,
Yeah.
we see it today, right? We've traveled to Central Asia, we've seen it firsthand. Yeah,
Mm.
um, obviously, generations, let's just say 2 generations of being unable to really practice the religion. Yeah, like I said, you still have the
Yeah.
identity. Yeah, I know I'm Muslim, but I don't know what that means, right? Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes it's just it might be, oh, I don't eat pork, or
Yeah,
we were
Mm.
in, I think it was
I'll drink. I'll
the
drink. Yeah, what's wrong with drink? Oh, why can I not drink?
Mm,
Oh,
mm, mm, mm.
I might pray once. I might do Jum'ah. I might go do Jum'ah, but I'm not going to pray
exactly.
my 5 daily
Yeah.
salawat like.
It's like
Um,
weddings and funerals are Muslim, and the rest of life, politics, society isn't. And it's one of the successes of the USSR is just stripping away like Islam from its socio-political impact. And we saw that in Kyrgyzstan, and I've seen it when I went to Albania and Turkey. They've obviously done a much better job than most other
yeah,
post-communist countries at recovering,
yeah,
but you still see the effects on language, culture, society, you know, and it's it's crazy, and I guess to a certain extent, and maybe you can weigh in here, like it's been a bit different, I guess, the recovery in the Caucasus relative to the other places, because obviously when we were in Kyrgyzstan, you could tell people there had they had a Soviet education. Religion is something backwards. It's not rational.
yeah,
We were talking to Muslims there, but you kind of have a sense that some of them
yeah.
had that attitude and a
Hmm.
certain perception about where Islam belongs, that you can sort of like coordinate it up and put it in certain events and places, the same with which is basically how the Soviets treated it. But you
Yeah,
know, I guess I don't really get that sense from the Caucasus as much. It feels a bit as if there's a greater level of religiosity. Maybe you'd know better.
yeah. I'd say once the Soviet Union collapsed, the different regions they obviously reacted differently, and they, I want to say, returned to Islam at different paces. right?
Yeah.
One of the things with the Caucasus that really accelerated that return to Islam was obviously the wars there. The first
Hmm.
and second Chechen wars that occurred in 1995 and in 2000 really united the people, really brought them back to Islam. We had a lot of different figures came over from the Middle East, from the Muslim countries to help support the Muslims, and they declared, obviously, 1995 the Chechens, they won the first war, and they obviously established their own government, Sharia, all of this type of things, right? Russians came back in 2000, carpet bombed everything, took control of the region, whatever, and the rest is history. But that really accelerated that return to Islam. Once you're put in a situation that is tough, your
Hmm.
relatives are dying, you're starving, you have to flee. That kind
Yeah.
of brings you back, to your roots. You
Uh-huh.
have a bit of taqwa in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners, that this is your patience will be rewarded. This accelerated that return to Islam, yeah. Whereas in other regions, let's say in Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, there wasn't that conflict, right? The Soviet Union collapsed and they just continue with their ways, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
You didn't have an influx of scholars, of knowledgeable people from the Middle East,
Yeah.
or you didn't have a lot of the natives going over to study and come back,
Yeah.
or people, or maybe like for example maybe some of the Vainaks who were in foreign lands, they came back during those times. You didn't really have that with those Central Asian states, and because
Hmm.
of the kind of return to Islam has been a lot slower. Certain
Yeah.
places like Uzbekistan, who have a history, a culture of Islam, you can see that their return to
Fire. Yeah.
practice is a lot quicker, right? Because
Yeah.
they look
Exactly.
around, they say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm in Bukhara. Look at this ancient mosque. Oh, we have
Exactly.
Bukhari. Look at this historical figure. We revere him. We respect him. Why is that? Oh yeah, let's learn about him. Yada yada yada." Right?
Exactly. I guess the heritage
Exactly.
there is a bit of an advantage because, like, if people don't know, Uzbekistan had the great cities of Central Asia, Bukhara, Samarkand, uh, are in Uzbekistan, even though they were actually Persian cities. But just
Yeah.
the way that the Soviets drew those dumb borders, it just happened. They're like, oh, we're creating this country over here, Uzbekistan. It's all Turkic people,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have any cities, so we'll throw them these ones in the
Yeah.
Fergana Valley and wherever else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like you're saying that is an advantage because culture
Yeah.
and heritage speaks in that way. Whereas obviously Kyrgyzstan is just mountains and lakes. There's actually not like a huge amount of pre-modern history, architecture kind of heritage. Like we noticed when we were there.
Yeah. They
Um,
only started building like 100 years ago, really settling before they were just
and it's all Soviet stuff. Yeah.
pastures and
So
booming, like yeah.
yeah, no. So and again, if you go to like Egypt or you go to anywhere where there's like Muslim students, you will actually bump into Uzbeks, and they're there studying and they're going to go back to their country. So people do talk about the
Yeah.
Islamic revival in Central Asia, but like you were
Yeah.
saying, it is a bit far behind. And again, we still have a lot of disadvantages there, in terms of that Soviet impact. Because a big win obviously is just the national identities that were created. All of these have no basis in history. There was
Yeah.
no Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. Even when we were in Kyrgyzstan, the local people said we are the same as the Kazakhs in terms of our language and culture. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
I like they were saying we'd marry a Kazakh because they're the same as us. It was interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but those
Exactly.
national
Yeah.
identities do
Yeah.
exist, and they were
Mhm.
specifically designed by the Soviets because they wanted like this. They had this weird policy. They wanted to create the national identity and then get that national identity to buy into communism. And
Yeah.
and so you still have these identities, still have these systems, like in terms of like the education and the institutions are pretty much generally quite Soviet. I haven't heard of any great strides in sort of like de-Sovietization or whatever the term is.
Mm.
Like most of those Central Asian countries still use Cyrillic in their alphabet. And obviously their languages were all removed Arabic, Persian influence. So
Mm.
so
Yeah. I
there's
mean,
still a
to
lot
be
of
honest, even the
place that are
governments,
problematic.
they're
Pardon?
still proxy states to Russia. Some of these
Yeah,
governments, Kazakhstan
yeah,
and stuff, they
exactly.
just love Russia. Russia tells them to move right, move left. They're gonna do exactly that.
Yeah, yeah, big
Um,
time.
yeah, but you're correct in saying, like, nowadays you'd go to the place in Egypt, you go to Saudi, places where the Islamic education, all the different universities, you'll find a lot of Central Asians, particularly Uzbeks, right? And this is kind of what's been pushing that revival, right? These guys from the Central Asian countries,
Yeah,
Uzbekistan, Kyrgyz people, Kazakhs, they'll come, they'll learn, spend a few years there, and then they start going back to their own lands and really
yeah,
teaching people what
Yeah.
true Islam is. Like you
yeah,
said, that Soviet mentality remained largely there, more so than in the Caucasus. And because of that,
yeah,
there's a lot of ignorance, right, in regards to the
yeah,
religion, in regards to the practice of what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's mandatory, what needs to be done. And so these guys are coming back now, and they're really educating their people. We're starting to see people with real knowledge, real native people with real knowledge of the Deen,
yeah.
going back and kind of pushing that revival. Right when we were in Kyrgyzstan, remember we spoke to our guide, and he talked about the masajid, the number of masajid, the increase in the masajid in Kyrgyzstan. He said 10 years ago there was 50 masajid, now there's 1,500.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
There you go.
So really, really, really starting to see a revival. And I think it's
Exactly.
important because these were really, like you mentioned, Uzbekistan was a bastion of Islamic civilization for centuries. Some of the great
100%.
Islamic cities
Yeah.
are in these lands. Look at the scholars that came from these lands, not just
Mm.
Uzbekistan, from Turkmenistan. We have Imam
100%.
Bukhari, Imam Muslim, Imam Tirmidhi, all these major, major
100%.
scholars, they come from these lands.
Mm.
Big scholars, big leaders of this religion came from there. Even for like for people from Pakistan, they don't necessarily know this, but the founder of the Mughal Empire was from what is now
Yeah,
Yeah.
Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
Was
yeah,
it Babur here?
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
I believe so. Yeah.
Mughal
Turkish,
Empire was a Turkic person
Yeah.
Turkey,
came
yeah,
over, you know,
yeah, yeah.
to India to praise the Lord.
Yeah,
But
you can't underestimate the importance and the historical significance of this region, especially to for
oh,
us as an ummah.
yeah, and so it is exciting to hear about like that there is a revival to be going on. To be fair, like
Yeah.
it might be behind the cases, but there is a revival going on, and even it's even commented on by Western press. They talk, but they commented on it in a very negative light. Oh no, there's the Islamic
Yeah.
the
Radicalization.
extremist threat of Central Asia. They're because they're embracing religion, but
Yeah,
obviously that's just thinly veiled Orientalism. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, it's there's something else I was gonna add to that point. I'm forgetting now. Is yeah. Oh, one thing as well. I think it's interesting to note is that like after the Soviets fell, like a lot of Muslim organizations did come in to try to do dawah. Like there was Tabligh came in and Hizb ut-Tahrir came in, and whoever else. A lot of these organizations and efforts were actually initially banned because
Mm.
the the post-Soviet elites still were had that sort of Soviet communist mindset, and they saw any sort of religious expression as a threat. And I think that belief exists pretty much in all Central Asian countries up until now. Um,
Mm, yeah,
and I'd say same with the Caucasus as well. I guess there's that belief that uncontrolled religious expression is is a problem, and so the state oftentimes up until now tries to regulate and corral religious activity, have state imams and
yeah,
state khutbas and that sort of thing. But again, like the internet it has been a wonder, and there's a lot of, for example, like Salafi Dawa is well known to be very popular now just on the internet. People are, there was an Al Jazeera article a few years ago I was reading, a girl that was in university, and I think it was Uzbekistan, and she was watching videos online and decided, oh, I'm going to start wearing hijab, and and that obviously things like that are they receive negative press in the West oftentimes, and the
Yeah.
government's not are obviously hostile to it, but it's still happening,
Mm.
which is good that there is dawah
Yeah.
happening and people reconnecting.
yeah. And I'd say that that Salafi form of dawah is actually the main one right now that's really accelerating
Yeah,
the change because the state imams, the state sponsored
yeah,
schools of Islam, they're all more of I'd say more of not the traditional Sufi orientation, but their interpretation of the
yeah,
Sufi tradition, right?
yeah,
Different tariqas, different practices, whatever it may be. And obviously, because imagine you yourself, right? You're in the Caucasus, you're in Central Asia, right? And you see that the government, who has been known or who you've known to be enemies of Islam, right? know to be the ones who have tried to erase this identity from you, that they are pushing this school of thought, or these tariqas or these practices. You're automatically
Yeah,
going to have a you're going to oppose this. You're going to
of
try
course.
moving
Yeah,
in the opposite direction, right? And that's where you get the Salafi dawah. A lot of the people that go to study, they're going to Medina, they're going to Egypt, and this is the education that they're picking up. These are the scholars that they're learning from,
yeah.
and they're coming back with this sort of orientation. And it's proved to be very successful. We know, obviously, Salafi
100%,
dawah
you
is
know.
extremely strong. It's really effective. They really simplify it. A lot of these practices that these governments or these state imams try to push, they don't really make sense.
Exactly. And
Stuff like,
I think that's what it comes
yeah,
down to is that people don't want to follow like a state religion.
yeah,
Religion isn't, especially Islam, isn't a state enterprise or a state you know state tool.
yeah,
And that's how it comes across. And so oftentimes it's the non-state controlled version of religion, which is going to be the healthy one that's proliferated and popular. I think in other countries, in Saudi Arabia or some other countries, for example, you know Salafism it has a worse reputation because of its cooperation with the state. But
yeah,
it's interesting in Chechnya and Central Asia, it's the opposite. They're the ones who are giving the healthy, authentic dawah that is just trying to get people into the religion rather than some sort of like tool,
yeah.
or mechanism for control.
And like I said, the da'wah that they do is simple. They say follow the Quran and the Sunnah. Before, people weren't really doing that, you know.
Hmm.
And because of that, it's very simple message. Just
Hmm.
really simplifies it to what they're being told to do, and people follow. Alhamdulillah, we've seen a lot of success from that, and a return to the Sunnah and the way a Muslim should live his life. So Alhamdulillah, obviously, still there's a lot of restrictions. Certain books are still banned. I don't know if it's still banned. Bukhari was banned. The what's the book? Riyadh al-Salihin
Yeah.
banned. Still in Russia banned. I don't know if it's still banned, but it was banned. Might still be banned. Um, so there's still a lot of restriction there, and they're really still keeping an eye on these people, these groups, these movements, this dawah. It's not like it's open season like we know, for example, in Chechnya with Kadyrov there nowadays. You can't just go on even wear niqab. I'm sure we've seen some of the videos there where they're forcibly, removing niqabs of women on television. Shameful
Mm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Deal with them accordingly. Yeah, it's not as simple. Obviously, certain regions, even in Russia itself, obviously it's different republics. Certain republics such as Chechnya have a lot more difficult. May Allah make it easy on them.
Maybe.
Ingushetia, for example, is a bit more lax. We don't have a figure like Kadyrov. We're not as big. There's not as many people, so we don't need someone as controlling. Might change. We never know. Dagestan's the same thing. Um, so different regions in
Yeah.
Russia, different reactions. We see
Hmm.
that a lot of obviously lot of action from KGB, Secret Service, a lot of meddling, let's just say.
Hmm.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I suppose.
inshallah, Allah make it easy.
I mean, yeah, it's a complicated situation, but I suppose through all the challenges that are still happening, it is at least it's good to hear that there is still kind of this increase of the return of Islam in that region and in the Caucasus, so in the Northern Caucasus. So it's a lot of positives to take as well, really. And such an interesting history as well.
Yeah, I
That,
think yeah, the history is interesting. The current affairs is like a
yeah,
whole different
all the yeah.
conversation. There's a lot to talk about there, but I think we've kind of maybe given you an idea of what it is
Hmm.
like now. So inshallah should
No, 100%.
suffice.
And it's again just something to appreciate that there is a return to Islam going on there. People say like commentators in the West are always talking about rise of atheism and the death of God, but that's just not the Muslim experience.
Mm,
We have in the Muslim lands, iman goes up and down, but people don't leave Islam. And when they were forced out of it by the Soviets, the only thing they're going to do is return back to it. You know, so it's inshallah, khair, it's just something that is, I guess, a big positive takeaway for us, for these lands,
Absolutely. And yeah, no, with that, I think we can conclude. And yeah, just Safalkar to both of you, especially you, Hassan. It's been really great having you as a guest for these two podcasts. Really, really informative, especially about a region that certainly I'm neither myself or Zan or as acquainted with as you are. So it was really good having your expertise and your your experience and knowledge on the region. And yeah, I appreciate it a lot. And
Mm.
it's up to everyone watching, listening, and yeah, inshallah, we'll see you in the next episode. So.